The icy wind sliced through the cracks of the abandoned cabin like a knife, but Rose Jameson barely noticed, too focused on the sound of hoofbeats that had suddenly stopped outside. 3 days hiding in this frozen hellhole in the mountains outside Skidoo, California, had taught her to fear every noise. The year was 1878, and death came quick to women alone in the wilderness, especially women with a price on their head. Rose pressed herself against the wall, clutching her father's old Colt revolver with trembling fingers. The floorboards of the porch creaked under heavy boots. Her breath caught in her throat as the door handle turned slowly. The first rays of dawn filtered through the frost-covered windows as the door swung open. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the pink-orange glow of sunrise. Rose raised her gun. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, miss," came a deep voice, calm and steady. "You're safe with me." The stranger stepped inside, his features becoming clearer in the dim light, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that had seen too much sun and too many hardships. His eyes were startlingly blue beneath the brim of a well-worn Stetson. He raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. "Quentin Rawlins, madam. Sheriff sent me to find you." Rose didn't lower her gun. "The sheriff of Skidoo is in Donovan's pocket." The man called Quentin removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with hints of silver at the temples. "Not anymore. Things have changed since you ran." "Prove it," she challenged, her voice stronger than she felt. He reached slowly into his coat, pulling out a badge and a folded piece of paper. "New sheriff. Name's Matthews. Asked me to bring you back safe." He paused, studying her pale face and the dark circles under her eyes. "You look half frozen and half starved. When's the last time you ate?" Rose's stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. She hadn't eaten properly since fleeing town, surviving on stale biscuits and melted snow. Still, she kept the gun trained on him. "Donovan's men are still looking for you," Quentin continued, "but they're searching the pass to Nevada. No one knows about this cabin except the sheriff and me now." "And how did you find it?" she asked suspiciously. "Your father and I rode together years back. He mentioned this place once." Quentin took a tentative step forward. "I know what Donovan's men did to your father, Miss Jameson. I know why you shot his foreman." Rose's hand trembled. The memories were still too fresh, her father's blood staining the snow outside their homestead. Samuel Donovan's sneering face as he claimed their land was his now. The foreman's hands on her as she fought back. The sound of the gunshot that had forced her to flee. "The law's on your side," Quentin said softly. "Self-defense is no crime, but you'll freeze to death up here, and that would be giving Donovan exactly what he wants." The exhaustion of the past days caught up with her suddenly. The gun felt impossibly heavy in her hand. "I can't go back," she whispered. "They'll kill me." "Not while I'm breathing," Quentin answered, his voice carrying a promise that, against all reason, she wanted to believe. Rose lowered the gun finally, the last of her strength ebbing away. "I haven't slept in 3 days." Quentin moved forward, taking the revolver gently from her hand. "Rest. I'll keep watch and get a fire going. When you wake up, we'll figure out our next steps." Rose felt herself sway on her feet. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was the surprising gentleness of the cowboy's hands as he caught her. When Rose awoke, the cabin was warm. A fire crackled in the small stone fireplace, and the smell of coffee and something cooking made her stomach clench with hunger. She was lying on a bedroll near the fire, covered with a heavy blanket that smelled of leather and horses and clean male sweat. Quentin sat by the window, rifle across his knees, watching the snow-covered landscape outside. He turned when she stirred, his expression softening. "Welcome back," he said. "You've been out for about 6 hours." Rose sat up slowly, feeling oddly vulnerable. "You stayed." Said I would, didn't I? He stood, moving to the small pot hanging over the fire. Nothing fancy, but it's hot. Beans and jerky, coffee's fresh too. Her hands trembled as she accepted the tin plate and mug he offered. The first bite nearly made her cry with relief. She ate slowly, savoring each mouthful, aware of his watchful gaze. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally. "You don't know me." Quentin settled back in his chair, turning his coffee mug in his hands. "I knew your father. Jack Jameson was a good man. Saved my hide once when we were driving cattle up from Texas." He paused. "And I've had my own run-ins with Samuel Donovan, man's poison to skidoo. Been buying up land all through the valley, forcing folks out." "He wanted our water rights," Rose said quietly. "Papa refused to sell. Said our land had been in the family since before California was a state. And Donovan doesn't take kindly to being refused," Quentin finished for her. "I know. When I heard what happened, I offered to help Sheriff Matthews track you down before Donovan's boys did." Rose studied him over the rim of her mug. He was older than she'd first thought, maybe mid-30s to her 23 years. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and perhaps of laughter in better times. "What's your stake in all this?" she asked. "You're not from Skidoo." "No, madam. I've got a small spread about 30 miles south. Came to town to sell some horses when all this blew up." He took a sip of coffee. "Been helping the new sheriff get his footing. Donovan had the last one in his pocket, but Matthews is cut from different cloth. And you think he can stand against Donovan, against his money and his men?" Quentin's eyes hardened. "With the right evidence and the right witnesses, yes. That's where you come in, Miss Jameson." Rose set down her empty plate, the momentary comfort from the food fading. "I can't testify. His men saw me shoot Barton. They'll twist it." "Maybe. But there were other witnesses too. Folks in town who have been afraid to speak up." Quentin leaned forward. "This could be the chance to break Donovan's hold on Skidoo once and for all, but we need you." Rose stood suddenly, moving to the window. The mountains stretched out before her, beautiful and merciless in their winter coat. "I can't go back there. Not yet." "Then we wait," Quentin said simply. "Sheriff's gathering evidence, building a case against Donovan for your father's murder and a half-dozen other crimes. When the time's right, we'll go." She turned to face him, surprised. "You'd stay here, with me, until it's safe." His voice was matter-of-fact, but something in his eyes made her heart beat a little faster. "Donovan's men will be watching the trails for a lone woman. They won't be looking for two travelers together. And if they find us anyway," Quentin's hand rested briefly on the gun at his hip, "then they'll regret it." The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended state. The snowstorm that had threatened finally arrived, blanketing the mountains in fresh powder and making travel impossible. Rose found herself oddly grateful for the enforced confinement. For the first time since her father's murder, she felt something approaching safe. Quentin proved to be a quiet but companionable presence. He took care of the horses, hunted when the weather allowed, and kept the fire burning. In the evenings, he told her stories of his years as a cowhand and later as a small rancher. Rose found herself listening eagerly, drawn to the deep cadence of his voice and the glimpses of the life he'd carved out for himself. On the third night, as they sat before the fire, Rose finally spoke about what had happened. "Papa and I were getting ready for supper," she began, staring into the flames. "We heard horses, too many to be neighbors. Papa told me to hide in the root cellar." Her voice faltered. "I should have stayed with him." "And died alongside him?" Quentin asked gently. "What good would that have done?" "I might have saved him." The familiar guilt washed over her. "Instead, I cowered while they shot him down on our own land. You did what he asked, what any father would want for his daughter." Quentin's voice was firm. What happened next? Rose closed her eyes, the memories too vivid. I heard Donovan's voice. He was angry that Papa wouldn't sign over the water rights. There was a shot, then another. She swallowed hard. They searched the house. I stayed hidden until they left. When I came out, Papa was lying in the snow. He was still alive, just barely. He told me to run, to get to town, tell the sheriff. But the sheriff was Donovan's man then, Quentin supplied. She nodded. I didn't know that. I went to town the next morning. Barton Donovan's foreman caught me before I reached the sheriff's office, said I was coming with him to see his boss. Her hands clenched in her lap. He dragged me into an alley. Said Donovan had plans for me, that with Papa gone, they'd make me sign over the land if I wanted to stay alive. He put his hands on me, said he might as well sample the goods first. Quentin's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her tell it at her own pace. I had Papa's gun in my coat. I'd never shot a man before. Rose looked up, meeting Quentin's eyes. I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted him to stop. You did what you had to, Quentin said quietly. No jury would convict you. Donovan's men saw it happen. They came running. I ran the other way, took a horse from behind the general store and just rode. She gave a bitter laugh. I didn't even know where I was going until I remembered this cabin. And you've been here since, Quentin finished for her. Rose nodded. 3 days alone, jumping at every sound, sure they'd find me. She looked at him questioningly. How did you know to look here? Your father mentioned this place years ago, said his grandfather built it for hunting. When the sheriff and I realized you disappeared, I remembered it. He added more wood to the fire. We've been trying to build a case against Donovan for months. Your father's murder and what happened to you might finally be enough to bring him down. If anyone believes me, Rose said softly. They will. Quentin's voice held such certainty that she almost believed him. There are others willing to testify now. The doctor who saw your father's body. The stable boy who saw Donovan's men ride out that night. Even the bartender at the Silver Spur heard Donovan threatening your father the week before. Hope flickered in Rose's chest for the first time. Really? Really? Quentin smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. You're not alone in this fight, Miss Jameson. Rose, she said suddenly. Please call me Rose. After everything you've done, Miss Jameson seems too formal. Rose, he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her cheeks warm. I suppose you should call me Quentin, then. That night, Rose slept better than she had since her father's death. The knowledge that she wasn't alone anymore eased something tight within her chest. And if her dreams were visited by a pair of startlingly blue eyes and a deep voice promising safety, well, that was her secret to keep. The storm broke the next morning, leaving the world outside transformed into a glittering white landscape. Rose stood in the doorway, breathing in the sharp, clean air, watching as Quentin checked on the horses in the small lean-to shelter beside the cabin. He moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, talking softly to the animals as he worked. His own mount, a magnificent chestnut gelding, nickered affectionately as Quentin ran a hand down its neck. The horse Rose had stolen was there too, looking considerably better for Quentin's care over the past days. Weather's clearing, he said as he approached the cabin. Should be able to travel soon if the pass doesn't ice over again. Rose felt a complicated mix of relief and regret. Relief that they could finally move forward with bringing Donovan to justice. Regret that this strange, peaceful interlude would end. When do we leave? She asked. Tomorrow, if the weather holds. Quentin stopped beside her, looking out at the mountains. One more day to let the trails clear a bit. We'll head out at first light, make it to my place by nightfall. Your place? Rose looked at him in surprise. I thought we were going to Skidoo. Eventually. but my ranch is safer for now and closer. Sheriff Matthews can meet us there." His expression turned serious. "Donovan's still got too many eyes in town. We need to be careful about how we bring you in." The idea of seeing Quentin's home stirred an unexpected curiosity in Rose. "What's it like? Your ranch?" A smile softened his features. "Nothing fancy. 100 acres, most of it good grazing land. Small creek running through it. Cabin's bigger than this one, though." He glanced at her. "Built it myself. Added a room last summer. Haven't quite decided what to do with it yet." There was something almost shy in the way he said it, making Rose wonder if there was more to the story than he was telling. "Sounds peaceful," she said. "It is. Gets lonely sometimes." He said it casually, but Rose caught the undercurrent in his words. Never minded it much before. Lately, though. He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "Should check our supplies for the journey." Rose watched him go back inside, feeling a flutter of something unfamiliar in her chest. 3 days ago, Quentin Rawlins had been a stranger. Now, she found herself increasingly aware of him, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness in hands that were clearly capable of violence when necessary. That evening, as they prepared for their journey, the atmosphere in the cabin seemed charged with unspoken words. Rose caught Quentin watching her several times, his expression thoughtful. Each time, he quickly looked away when their eyes met. They ate dinner in companionable silence, the stew Quentin had prepared from a rabbit he'd caught that morning warming them against the chill that still permeated the cabin despite the fire. "Thank you," Rose said suddenly, "for finding me, for staying." Quentin looked up, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "No need for thanks, couldn't leave you up here alone." "Most men would have," she countered, "or worse." His face darkened. "I'm not most men, no," she agreed softly. "You're not." A log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. In the momentary flare of light, Rose saw something in Quentin's expression that made her breath catch a longing quickly masked but unmistakable. "We should get some sleep," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Long ride tomorrow." Rose nodded, suddenly nervous though she couldn't have explained why. As they had every night, they prepared for sleep on opposite sides of the small cabin, Quentin near the door, Rose closer to the fire. Yet tonight, the space between them seemed both too vast and not vast enough. "Quentin," she said into the darkness after the fire had died down to embers, "are you afraid of what Donovan might do?" There was a long pause before he answered. "Not for myself. Man like that, though, he doesn't forget those who cross him." "Is that why you never married?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Because of men like Donovan." Another pause, longer this time. "Never found the right woman," he said finally. "Or maybe I did, but the timing wasn't right. Life out here, it's hard on women. Harder still on children." "My mother managed," Rose said. "Until the fever took her when I was 12. She never regretted marrying Papa, even with all the hardships. She must have been a strong woman. She was. Papa said I'm just like her." Rose smiled into the darkness. "Stubborn as a mule," he'd say, "but with a heart big enough for the whole territory." "I believe that," Quentin said softly. "The heart part anyway." Rose felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "Good night, Quentin. Good night, Rose." Sleep was long in coming for Rose that night, her mind filled with thoughts of the journey ahead and the man sleeping just a few feet away. They set out at dawn, the air cold and clear, their breath forming clouds in the early morning light. Rose wore her own clothes, now dried and somewhat cleaner, with Quentin's heavy coat draped over her shoulders for extra warmth. He'd insisted, despite her protests, that he would freeze. "Got my sheepskin jacket," he'd said, shrugging into the worn garment. "This coat's too big for you, but it'll keep the wind out." The descent from the mountains was slow and careful. Quentin led the way, frequently glancing back to check on Rose, offering advice on navigating the tricky sections of trail. By midday, they had reached lower elevations where the snow gave way to cold, muddy ground. They stopped to rest the horses near a small stream, the water running swift and clear beneath a thin crust of ice at the edges. "Making good time," Quentin said, handing Rose a piece of jerky and some hardtack. "Should reach the ranch before sundown." Rose nodded, chewing the tough meat gratefully. The ride had been harder than she'd expected, her muscles unused to so many hours in the saddle after days of inactivity in the cabin. "How much farther?" she asked. "About 15 miles. Quentin studied her face. "You holding up all right?" "I'm fine," she insisted, though she couldn't quite suppress a wince as she shifted position. His eyes crinkled with amusement. "Sure you are, we'll take it slow." They remounted and continued south, the landscape gradually changing from pine forests to rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and manzanita. Rose found herself relaxing as the miles passed with no sign of pursuit. Quentin pointed out landmarks and told stories about the area, his deep voice a comforting presence. "That ridge there," he said, gesturing to a rocky outcropping to their west, "was where I tracked a mountain lion last winter. Had been taking calves from ranches all through the valley." "Did you kill it?" Rose asked. Quentin shook his head. "Tracked it to its den, found cubs, couldn't bring myself to leave them motherless." He glanced at her. "Relocated the whole family instead, deeper into the mountains where game is plentiful but cattle are scarce." Rose looked at him with new respect. Most men would have shot it without a second thought. "Most men don't take time to understand what they're hunting," he replied. Then, with a small smile, "Like I said, I'm not most men." The sun was low on the horizon when they crested a final hill and Quentin reined in his horse. "There it is," he said quietly. "Home." Below them stretched a valley, green even in winter, with a creek winding through it like a silver ribbon. A small cabin larger than the mountain refuge, but still modest, stood near a cluster of outbuildings. A corral held several horses, and in the distance, Rose could make out cattle grazing on the hillsides. It wasn't grand by any measure, but there was something about the neat, well-maintained property that spoke of care and pride. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. Quentin's expression softened as he looked at his land. "It's not much, but it's mine. Every acre paid for. Every building raised with these hands." There was quiet satisfaction in his voice. "Come on. I don't know about you, but I could use a real meal and a warm bed." As they rode down into the valley, Rose felt an unexpected sense of anticipation. This place, Quentin's home, represented safety in a way that even the mountain cabin hadn't. Here was tangible proof of what a man could build with determination and hard work, the same qualities she'd seen in her father, the same values she'd been raised to respect. They were greeted at the corral by an older Mexican man who emerged from one of the outbuildings at the sound of their approach. "Senor Rawlins, you returned finally." The man's weathered face broke into a wide smile that faltered slightly when he noticed Rose. "And you bring company, I see." "Manuel, this is Miss Rose Jameson," Quentin said as he dismounted. "She'll be staying with us for a while. Rose, this is Manuel Ortiz, the best ranch hand in California and a friend I don't deserve." Manuel removed his hat and bowed slightly to Rose. "Señorita, welcome. Any friend of Quentin's is welcome here." "Thank you," Rose said, suddenly shy under the old man's curious but kind gaze. "Manuel, Miss Jameson has had a difficult journey. Would you mind seeing to the horses while I show her to the house?" "Of course, of course." Manuel took the reins from Quentin. "Isabel has kept the house ready for your return. There is stew, I think, and fresh bread from yesterday. Isabel? Rose questioned as they walked toward the cabin. Manuel's wife, Quentin explained. They live in the small house behind the barn. Been with me since I started this place. More family than employees, really. The interior of Quentin's home was simple but comfortable, a large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, a solid wooden table with 4 chairs, and a few pieces of sturdy furniture. Everything was clean and orderly, with unexpected touches of beauty, colorful woven blankets draped over the chairs, a vase of dried wildflowers on the table, bookshelves filled with volumes that spoke of a mind hungry for knowledge. "It's lovely," Rose said, turning to Quentin with genuine admiration. "You've made a real home here." A slight flush colored his cheekbones. Isabel's influence, mostly, said a house needed a woman's touch, even if there wasn't a woman in residence. She comes in a few times a week to keep things from falling into complete bachelor disarray. He showed her to a small bedroom off the main room. "This was meant to be a guest room, though you're the first to use it." There was that almost shy quality in his voice again. "Bathrooms out back, nothing fancy, but there's a pump for water and a tub if you want to wash up. I'll heat some water for you." Left alone, Rose sat on the edge of the narrow bed, overwhelmed by the sudden transition from fugitive to guest. The room, like the rest of the house, was simple but thoughtfully arranged: a small chest for clothing, a bedside table with an oil lamp, a window overlooking the valley with curtains that looked handmade. She ran her fingers over the quilt covering the bed, patchwork in blues and greens, carefully stitched. Had Isabel made this too? Or had it belonged to Quentin's family, a treasure carried west like so many settlers brought pieces of their past lives to new territories? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Water's heating," Quentin said through the door. "There's a dress in the chest that might fit you. Belonged to Manuel's daughter before she married and moved to Sacramento." Rose opened the chest to find a simple blue cotton dress, slightly worn but clean and well mended. The gesture brought unexpected tears to her eyes, the thought that these people, strangers to her, would extend such kindness. The bath, when it came, was bliss beyond words. The small building behind the main house contained a metal tub, which Quentin and Manuel had filled with steaming water. Isabel, a round-faced woman with kind eyes and a shy smile, had provided soap that smelled of lavender and a towel that, while patched, was clean and soft. Rose soaked until the water cooled, washing away days of fear and grime. When she finally emerged, dressed in the borrowed blue dress with her damp hair pinned up as neatly as she could manage without a proper mirror, she felt transformed. Still Rose Jameson, but perhaps a version of herself that could face whatever came next. Dinner was a simple affair, but after days of jerky and beans, the hearty beef stew and fresh bread tasted like the finest restaurant fare. Manuel and Isabel joined them, the older couple's obvious affection for Quentin revealing much about the man who had rescued her. They treated him with respect, but without subservience, teasing him gently about his extended absence and his poor skill at darning his own socks. "And now you bring home a pretty señorita," Isabel said with a meaningful glance at her husband. "Perhaps our Quentin finally has sense enough to see what is before his eyes." "Isabel," Quentin warned, though there was no real heat in his tone. "Miss Jameson is here because she needs a safe place to stay. Nothing more." Rose felt her cheeks warm at the implication in Isabel's words and at Quentin's quick denial, which stung in a way she hadn't expected. Of course," Isabel said, not looking convinced. "Just as you built that extra room for someday guests." Quentin changed the subject then, asking Manuel about the cattle and the ranch operations during his absence. The conversation flowed easily around the table, and Rose found herself drawn into the warm circle of this makeshift family's dynamics. After dinner, Manuel and Isabel returned to their own home, leaving Rose and Quentin alone by the fire. The silence between them was comfortable at first, then increasingly charged with unspoken words. "Your friends are wonderful people," Rose said finally. Quentin smiled. "They are. Saved my life once, actually. Found me half dead from a bullet wound about 10 years back. Nursed me through a fever that should have killed me. When I recovered enough to work, Manuel offered me a job on the ranch where he was foreman." "What happened?" Rose asked, curious about this glimpse into his past. A shadow crossed Quentin's face. "Got on the wrong side of a land dispute, much like your father actually." He stared into the fire. "Difference was I lived, learned from it, saved every penny until I could buy this place. Small enough that no one coveted it, far enough from town to avoid most trouble." "And yet you got involved in my trouble," Rose said softly. "Why risk everything you've built?" Quentin looked at her directly then, his blue eyes intense in the firelight. "Some things are worth the risk." The weight of his gaze made Rose's heart beat faster. She looked away first, unsure how to respond to the current that seemed to flow between them. "Sheriff Matthews should be here tomorrow or the next day," Quentin said after a moment. "We can decide then how best to proceed against Donovan." The reminder of the real reason she was here, not as a guest or a friend, but as a witness in a dangerous case against a powerful man, sobered Rose instantly. "What if it doesn't work?" she asked, voicing the fear that had been lurking since they left the mountain cabin. "What if Donovan's influence is too strong, even with all the evidence?" Quentin's expression hardened. "Then we try something else. But I promise you this, Rose Jameson, one way or another, Samuel Donovan will pay for what he's done. And when it's over, you'll have your land back and your father's name cleared." His certainty was like a blanket around her shoulders, warm and comforting. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Later, lying in the narrow bed in the guest room, Rose listened to the unfamiliar sounds of Quentin's home, the creak of the timbers as they settled, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft footfalls of Quentin himself moving about the main room before retiring to his own bedroom. So much had changed in just a few days. A week ago, she had been Rose Jameson, daughter of a respected rancher with a future as predictable as the seasons. Now her father was dead. She was wanted for murder, and she was sleeping in a stranger's home, placing her trust and possibly her life in the hands of a man she barely knew. Yet somehow, despite everything, she felt a fragile hope blossoming in her chest, hope not just for justice, but for something she couldn't quite name, something to do with the way Quentin Rawlins looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice. Sheriff Matthews arrived the following afternoon, riding up to the ranch with another man Rose didn't recognize. Quentin, who had spent the morning showing Rose around the property, greeted them with cautious formality. "Rose, this is Sheriff James Matthews," he said, introducing a stocky man with a salt and pepper beard and shrewd eyes. "And this is Judge William Parker from the county seat." Rose felt her anxiety spike at the unexpected presence of a judge, but Quentin's reassuring hand on her elbow steadied her. "Miss Jameson," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. "Glad to see you safe. You led us on quite a chase." "I had reason to run," she replied, lifting her chin. "Indeed you did," Judge Parker interjected. His voice was deep and cultured, his manner dignified despite the dust of travel. "Which is precisely why we're here. May we speak inside, Mr. Rawlins?" Around the table in Quentin's home, the four of them discussed the case against Samuel Donovan. The judge took detailed notes as Rose recounted her father's murder and her encounter with Barton. Sheriff Matthews contributed information about other complaints against Donovan: extortion, intimidation, suspected involvement in the disappearance of 2 other ranchers who had refused to sell their land. "The problem," Judge Parker said finally, "is that much of this is circumstantial. Your testimony is compelling, Miss Jameson, but against Donovan's resources and connections." He spread his hands in a gesture of frustration. "What about the doctor?" Quentin asked. "He saw Jack Jameson's body, the wounds." Sheriff Matthews nodded. "Dr. Thompson is willing to testify that the wounds were consistent with murder, not the accident Donovan's men claimed." "And the stable boy, the bartender?" Quentin pressed. "Both afraid," the sheriff admitted. "But I think they'll speak up if they know they'll be protected." Judge Parker leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "What we need is something concrete, evidence that ties Donovan directly to these crimes." "What about Barton's gun?" Rose suggested suddenly. When he attacked me, he bragged about killing Papa. Said he'd used the same gun on 3 other men who crossed Donovan. He patted his holster when he said it." The men exchanged glances. "Where's the gun now?" Sheriff Matthews asked. "Should still be on his body," Rose said, suppressing a shudder at the memory. "Unless Donovan's men took it when they found him." The sheriff shook his head. "They didn't have time. We found Barton's body where he fell, buried him the next day after the inquest ruled justifiable homicide in self-defense." He looked at Rose with newfound respect. "The gun went into evidence. I can retrieve it. If it was used in multiple murders, there might be a way to prove it," Judge Parker mused. "Ballistics is a developing science, but I know an expert in San Francisco who might be able to match the bullets from Jack Jameson's body to that weapon." Hope kindled in Rose's chest. "So you believe me about what happened?" "I do, Miss Jameson," the judge said firmly. "And I believe Samuel Donovan has terrorized your community for too long. If we can prove he ordered your father's murder, we can put him away for good." Plans were made quickly after that. Sheriff Matthews would return to Skidoo to retrieve Barton's gun and secure statements from the other witnesses. Judge Parker would arrange for the ballistics expert to travel from San Francisco. Rose would remain at Quentin's ranch for her safety until it was time for her to testify. "It could be a few weeks," the judge warned. "These things take time to arrange properly, but if we're going to bring down a man like Donovan, we need an airtight case." After the men departed, Rose stood on the porch, watching their horses disappear down the trail toward town. The weight of what lay ahead settled heavily on her shoulders. "You did well in there," Quentin said, coming to stand beside her. "Your idea about the gun might be exactly what we needed." "I hope so," she said softly. "I just want this to be over. I want to go home." Quentin was silent for a long moment. "And after? What will you do with your father's ranch?" The question caught Rose by surprise. She hadn't thought beyond securing justice for her father. "I don't know," she admitted. "Run it, I suppose. It's all I have left of him, of my family." "It's a lot for one person to manage," Quentin observed, "especially in these parts where a woman alone is." He trailed off, seeming to realize the implications of his words. "Where a woman alone is a target," Rose finished for him, a touch of defiance in her voice. "I'm aware. But what choice do I have? Sell it after all Papa went through to keep it? Let Donovan win in the end?" "There are other choices," Quentin said quietly. "Partnerships. Arrangements that would allow you to keep the land while not facing the burdens alone." Rose looked at him sharply, trying to read his expression in the fading light. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Rawlins?" He seemed about to answer when Manuel called from the barn, asking for help with one of the horses. Quentin excused himself, leaving Rose to wonder what he had been about to say, and why the thought of it made her heart race. The days at Quentin's ranch settled into an unexpected rhythm. Rose found herself falling easily into the routines of ranch life, helping Isabel with household tasks in the mornings, and often accompanying Quentin on his rounds of the property in the afternoons. Despite the uncertainty of her situation, there was a comfort in the physical work and the ordered patterns of days measured by sunrise and sunset rather than fear and hiding. Quentin proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how he managed the cattle operation, explaining his plans for breeding stronger stock, demonstrating the irrigation system he'd designed to make the most of the creek that ran through his property. "You've built something remarkable here," Rose told him one afternoon as they rode back to the house after checking on a pregnant heifer. "Most men would have needed twice the hands to run a spread this size." Quentin shrugged, though she could tell he was pleased by the compliment. "Started small, built slowly, made mistakes and learned from them." He glanced at her. "Your father's place has better water rights, though, better soil in the north pastures, too. You've been to our ranch?" Rose asked, surprised. "A few times. Your father and I discussed the possibility of running our cattle together on the summer range." A shadow crossed his face. "That was before Donovan set his sights on your water rights." Rose felt a pang at the reminder of all she had lost, not just her father, but the future he had been planning, the connections he had been building in the community. "I wish I'd known," she said softly. "Papa didn't tell me about those discussions." Quentin's expression softened. "He spoke of you often, though, proud as could be of his daughter who could outride and outshoot most men in the territory." A small smile tugged at his lips. "Said you had definite opinions about how the ranch should be run." Rose laughed despite herself. "We argued sometimes. He was set in his ways. I'd read about new breeding methods, different approaches to grazing." The memory was bittersweet. He'd listen, then tell me we'd do it his way for now and maybe try my newfangled ideas next season. "Sounds like Jack," Quentin agreed, his voice warm with affection for her father. "Cautious but not closed-minded. Good combination in a rancher." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the valley. Rose found herself studying Quentin's profile, noting the strong line of his jaw, the way the sun had burnished his skin to a deep tan, the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. In the week she had been at his ranch, she had come to respect him deeply, his work ethic, his fairness with Manuel and the other occasional hands, his obvious love for the land. But there was something else growing alongside that respect, something that made her pulse quicken when he stood close, something that had her seeking out his company even when there was no practical reason to do so. "You're staring, Miss Jameson," Quentin said without turning his head, though she could hear the smile in his voice. Rose felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Just thinking." "About?" Now he did look at her, those blue eyes curious beneath the brim of his hat. "About how strange life is," she answered honestly. 2 weeks ago I'd never met you. Now I'm living in your home, learning your ways, dependent on your protection." She paused. "It should feel wrong or at least uncomfortable, but it doesn't." Quentin reined in his horse, turning in the saddle to face her fully. "And how does it feel?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. Rose met his gaze steadily. "Like I was meant to be here. Like despite everything terrible that happened, somehow I ended up exactly where I was supposed to be." The admission hung in the air between them, more revealing than she had intended. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Quentin reached across the space between their horses, his hand covering hers where it rested on the saddle horn. His palm was warm and calloused against her skin. "I'm glad you're here, Rose," he said simply. "Whatever the circumstances that brought you." The touch of his hand sent warmth spiraling through her body. She turned her palm upward, their fingers intertwining for a brief, electric moment before Quentin reluctantly withdrew. "We should get back," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Isabel will have dinner waiting." That night, Rose lay awake long after the house had fallen silent, replaying that moment on the trail, the warmth of Quentin's hand, the intensity in his eyes, the words unspoken but hovering between them. She was falling in love with him, she realized with startling clarity. It was too soon, too complicated, possibly even dangerous given the uncertainty of her future. And yet, like a spring flower pushing through the last snow of winter, this feeling would not be denied. The question that kept her awake, turning restlessly beneath the patchwork quilt, was whether Quentin felt the same, and if he did, what either of them could do about it, while the shadow of Samuel Donovan still loomed over her life. 3 days later, Sheriff Matthews returned with news. The ballistics expert had arrived from San Francisco and had confirmed that the bullets recovered from Jack Jameson's body matched Barton's gun. More importantly, the expert had matched those bullets to ones recovered from 2 other unsolved murders in the territory, both men who had refused to sell their land to Donovan. "It's enough for an arrest warrant," the sheriff explained, seated once again at Quentin's table. "Judge Parker is drawing it up now. We'll take Donovan into custody tomorrow." "What about his men?" Quentin asked, his hand resting protectively near Rose's on the table. "They're nearly as dangerous as he is." "Already handled," Matthews said with satisfaction. "Had deputies round up the worst of them yesterday on various charges: public drunkenness, disturbing the peace. They'll be cooling their heels in jail when we arrest their boss." Hope and fear warred in Rose's heart. "And then what?" "Then you'll need to come to town to give your formal statement," the sheriff said. "Your testimony, along with the ballistics evidence and the statements from the other witnesses, should be enough to send Donovan to prison for a very long time." "When?" Rose asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Day after tomorrow. Judge Parker wants to hold the preliminary hearing while the expert from San Francisco is still available to testify." Sheriff Matthews looked at her sympathetically. "I know it's sudden, but the sooner we move, the less chance Donovan has to intimidate witnesses or buy his way out of trouble." After the sheriff left, promising to return with an escort for Rose in 2 days' time, an uneasy silence fell over the house. The prospect of returning to Skidoo, of facing Donovan, of reliving the worst moments of her life in court, it all pressed down on Rose until she felt she could hardly breathe. Quentin found her later on the porch, staring out at the darkening valley, her arms wrapped tightly around herself against the evening chill. "You're cold," he said, draping a blanket around her shoulders. "Should come inside." "Just needed some air," she replied, grateful for the blanket and for his solid presence beside her. "It's all happening so fast." Quentin leaned against the porch railing, facing her. "You can do this, Rose. You're stronger than you know." "Am I?" She looked up at him, vulnerability plain in her expression. "I'm terrified, Quentin, not just of Donovan, but of what comes after, of being alone, of failing." "You won't be alone," he said, his voice low and intense. "Not unless you choose to be." Rose's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Quentin took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for something difficult. "I've been thinking about what you said about running your father's ranch alone, about the challenges of that." He paused. "I have a proposition for you." "A proposition?" Rose echoed, uncertain of his meaning. "A business arrangement of sorts." Quentin's eyes held hers steadily. "My land adjoins yours to the south. Combined, they would make one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. Better water management, more efficient grazing, shared labor costs." Rose stared at him, trying to understand what he was suggesting. "You want to buy my land?" "No," he said firmly. "I want to join our lands, through a partnership." He hesitated, then added quietly, "or through marriage." The word hung in the air between them, enormous in its implications. "Marriage," Rose repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're proposing a marriage of convenience. For the sake of the ranches." Quentin stepped closer, his expression intensely serious. "There's nothing convenient about how I feel when I'm with you, Rose Jameson." Her breath caught in her throat. "Quentin, let me finish," he said gently. "I know it's too soon. I know you're facing the fight of your life right now, and I know that any future you choose needs to be your choice, not something forced on you by circumstances." His hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, the touch feather light. "But I also know that in the short time I've known you, you've come to mean more to me than I thought possible, and I hope that you might feel something similar." Rose felt tears welling in her eyes, overwhelmed by his words and by the emotions surging within her own heart. "I do," she admitted, "feel something. For you, but everything is so uncertain. I'm not asking for an answer now," Quentin interrupted. "I'm asking you to consider the possibility of our future once this is over, once you're free of Donovan's shadow." His thumb gently wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Whatever you decide, I'll respect it, and whatever happens in town, I'll be by your side." In that moment, with the stars beginning to appear above them and the warmth of Quentin's touch grounding her, Rose made a decision. She raised herself on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his a brief, sweet kiss that carried both promise and question. Quentin's response was immediate and heartfelt. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Was that a yes?" he asked, a smile in his voice. "That was a ask me again when this is over," Rose replied, her own lips curving upward despite her fears. "But I'm very much hoping I'll say yes." Quentin's laugh was soft and warm. "I can work with that." They stood together on the porch for a long time after that, Rose wrapped in both the blanket and Quentin's arms, watching the stars emerge in the vast California sky. Tomorrow would bring preparations for the confrontation to come. The day after would take them back to Skidoo and the reckoning with Samuel Donovan. But tonight, in this moment, there was only the two of them and the fragile, precious beginning of something that felt very much like love. The journey to Skidoo the following day was tense but uneventful. Sheriff Matthews had returned with 2 deputies as escort, and Quentin rode close beside Rose, his presence a constant reassurance. Manuel and Isabel had seen them off with solemn good wishes and promises of prayers for their safe return. Rose had dressed carefully in her own clothes, now cleaned and mended by Isabel's skilled hands. She sat straight in the saddle, determined to face what was coming with the dignity her father would have expected of her. As they approached the outskirts of town, Quentin moved his horse closer to hers. "Remember," he said quietly, "you're not alone in this. The whole town is watching Donovan fall." Rose nodded, drawing strength from his confidence. "I'm ready." Skidoo had changed in the weeks since she'd fled. The most obvious difference was the absence of Donovan's men lounging outside the saloons and intimidating passers-by. Instead, ordinary townspeople went about their business, many stopping to stare as Rose and her escorts rode down the main street. To her surprise, several people nodded respectfully or even touched their hats in greeting. News of Donovan's arrest had clearly spread, along with the understanding that Rose had been right all along. Sheriff Matthews led them directly to the courthouse, a modest building at the center of town. Inside, Judge Parker was already seated at the bench, his expression grave as Rose entered. A small crowd had gathered: local businessmen, ranchers from outlying areas, women from the town's respectable families. And there, at a table with a sleek-looking lawyer, sat Samuel Donovan himself. Rose faltered at the sight of him, memories of her father's body in the snow flashing before her eyes. Quentin's hand at the small of her back steadied her, his voice a whisper in her ear. "He can't hurt you anymore." Drawing a deep breath, Rose walked forward to take her seat at the table beside the prosecutor, a serious young man introduced as Mr. Harrington from the county seat. The hearing proceeded with formal precision. Judge Parker explained that this was a preliminary proceeding to determine if there was sufficient evidence to hold Samuel Donovan for trial on charges of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, extortion, and various lesser offenses. One by one, witnesses came forward. Dr. Thompson described the wounds that had killed Jack Jameson, stating unequivocally that they were not consistent with an accidental fall from a horse, as Donovan's men had claimed. The stable boy testified to seeing Donovan's men ride out the night of the murder and return with blood on their clothes. The bartender recounted Donovan's public threats against Jack Jameson in the days before his death. Then came the expert from San Francisco, who presented detailed evidence showing that the bullets recovered from Jack Jameson's body matched Barton's gun, the same gun that had been used in 2 other murders of men who had refused to sell their land to Donovan. Throughout it all, Donovan sat impassively, occasionally whispering to his lawyer but showing no visible reaction to the mounting evidence against him. Only when Rose took the stand did his expression change, his eyes narrowing with barely concealed hatred. Rose told her story clearly, from the night of her father's murder through her confrontation with Barton and subsequent flight. Her voice wavered only once, when describing finding her father dying in the snow. She did not look at Donovan, focusing instead on Quentin's supportive presence in the front row of spectators. When she finished, Judge Parker thanked her with genuine respect in his voice. Donovan's lawyer declined to cross-examine her, perhaps recognizing that challenging her sympathetic testimony would only damage his client's case further. The proceeding concluded with Judge Parker's ruling. Samuel Donovan would be held for trial on all charges, with no possibility of bail due to the seriousness of the offenses and the risk that he might flee or intimidate witnesses. As Donovan was led away in handcuffs, he turned suddenly toward Rose. "This isn't over, girl," he snarled. "No jail can hold me forever, and I have a long memory." Before anyone could react, Quentin stepped between them, his voice low but carrying clearly in the hushed courtroom. "Threaten her again, Donovan, and it'll be the last thing you ever do." The deputies hustled Donovan out, and gradually the crowd dispersed, many stopping to offer Rose words of support or apology for not standing with her father sooner. "You did well," Sheriff Matthews told her when the room had cleared. "Judge Parker believes the case against Donovan is strong enough that he'll likely spend the rest of his life in prison." "What about my father's ranch?" Rose asked. "Is it still—" She couldn't finish the question. "Still yours," the sheriff confirmed. "Donovan never managed to file any paperwork claiming it. The deed remains in the Jameson name." He hesitated. "Though the place has been empty since, well, since everything happened. Might need some work to get it habitable again." "I'd like to see it," Rose said firmly. "Today, if possible." Quentin, who had been speaking with Judge Parker, rejoined them in time to hear her request. "I'll take you," he offered, "if the sheriff thinks it's safe." Matthews nodded. "Donovan's on his way to the county jail. His men are either locked up or have scattered. It should be safe enough now." The ride to her father's ranch, her ranch now, was emotionally charged for Rose. Every landmark, every turn in the road carried memories of her life before. When they finally crested the rise that overlooked the homestead, she reined in her horse, needing a moment to prepare herself. The house stood as she remembered it, though with an air of abandonment that tightened her throat. The barn needed repairs where winter storms had damaged the roof. The corral gate hung askew. But the land itself, the rolling pastures, the creek flowing through the valley, the distant mountains remained as beautiful as ever. "Home," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. Quentin said nothing, simply waiting beside her until she was ready to continue. The interior of the house was dusty, but otherwise undisturbed. Rose moved from room to room, touching familiar objects: her mother's rocking chair, her father's pipe rack, the quilt on her own bed that her grandmother had made. Each item carried memories, some painful, some precious. In her father's study, she found his ledgers and papers neatly organized as always. Running her fingers over his handwriting, she felt his loss anew, but also a growing determination to honor his legacy by preserving what he had built. Quentin had given her space, remaining in the main room while she reacquainted herself with her home. When she finally returned to him, her expression was composed despite the traces of tears on her cheeks. "It needs work," she acknowledged, "but it's still here, still mine." "Yes," Quentin agreed. "Though you don't have to decide anything today. You're welcome to stay at my place as long as you need." Rose looked around the house that held her entire past, then back at the man who had come to represent a possible future. I think I'd like that. At least until after Donovan's trial, after that." She took a deep breath. "After that, I'll be ready to make decisions about what comes next." Quentin's smile was gentle. "Whatever you decide, Rose, I'll support you." She moved closer to him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "You mentioned a partnership before, between our ranches." "I did," he confirmed, his eyes watchful. "I'd like to hear more about that idea," Rose said. "About how it might work, about the advantages for both properties." She hesitated, then added with a small smile, "The business advantages, I mean." Understanding dawned in Quentin's eyes, along with a warmth that made her heart beat faster. "I'd be happy to discuss those with you, at length, whenever you're ready." "I'm not ready for everything yet," Rose admitted, "but I think I'm ready to start considering possibilities." Quentin took her hand, his touch grounding and electrifying all at once. "Possibilities are a good place to start." They left the house as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, locking the door behind them with a promise to return soon. As they rode away, Rose looked back once at the home where she had grown up, the place that held both her happiest memories and her deepest grief. It would always be part of her, this land, this legacy. But as she turned to ride beside Quentin, their horses moving in easy synchronicity down the trail, she felt a subtle shift within herself, not a leaving behind, but an opening to what might lie ahead. The weeks that followed brought many changes. Samuel Donovan's trial was set for the spring, with Rose as a key witness. In the meantime, she divided her time between Quentin's ranch and working to restore her father's property. Manuel and Isabel became cherished friends, often accompanying them to the Jameson ranch to help with repairs and planning for the coming season. Winter softened gradually into the first tentative days of spring. The land awakened from its dormancy, new grass carpeting the valleys, wildflowers beginning to dot the hillsides. And as the world around them renewed itself, so too did the relationship between Rose and Quentin deepen and strengthen. Their courtship was unconventional by the standards of the day, born of crisis, nurtured in the practical work of ranch life, defined by mutual respect as much as by the growing passion between them. There were quiet evenings by the fire, discussing plans for joining their operations. There were long rides across their combined properties, imagining the possibilities of their united futures. There were increasingly tender moments stolen in the barn, behind the corral, in the shelter of an oak grove, kisses that grew more confident and urgent with each passing day. Through it all, Quentin never pressed Rose for a definitive answer to the question he had raised that night on his porch. He seemed content to let their relationship evolve naturally, to give her the time and space to heal from her losses and to be certain of her own heart. It was Rose who finally broached the subject again, one evening in late March as they sat on the porch of her father's house, her house now, slowly coming back to life under her care. The night was mild, the sky ablaze with stars, a crescent moon hanging low over the western ridge. "I've been thinking," she said, her hands folded in her lap, "about the future, about your proposition." Quentin sat very still beside her, only his eyes moving to study her face in the lamplight spilling from the window. "Have you now?" Rose nodded, suddenly nervous despite the certainty in her heart. "I've considered it from all angles, the practical benefits of combining our operations, the efficiencies we could achieve, the stronger position we'd have in the market." "Very logical considerations," Quentin agreed, though the slight quirk of his lips suggested he knew she was stalling. "Yes, well," Rose smoothed her skirt unnecessarily, "there are also other factors to consider, such as—" His voice was gentle, encouraging. Rose took a deep breath. "Such as the fact that I've fallen in love with you, Quentin Rawlins, and that while joining our ranches makes excellent business sense, I find I'm much more interested in joining our lives." Quentin's face transformed, joy breaking through his careful composure like sunrise over the mountains. "Rose," he breathed, reaching for her hands. "I'm not finished," she said, though she allowed him to take her hands in his. "I need you to understand that I'm choosing you not out of convenience or necessity or fear of being alone. I'm choosing this because in the midst of the worst days of my life, I found something I never expected to find, a partner, someone who sees me as I am, who respects my strength but doesn't hesitate to offer support when I need it." Her voice softened. "Someone I want to build a future with on equal terms." Quentin raised her hands to his lips, kissing each one reverently. "That's all I've ever wanted, Rose, to be your partner in every sense of the word." His eyes held hers, intense and earnest. "I love you. Have almost from the moment I found you in that cabin, gun in hand, ready to fight despite everything you'd been through." Rose felt tears of happiness welling in her eyes. "So," she said, attempting a businesslike tone despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her, "about that proposition of yours." With a laugh that held all the joy of his heart, Quentin slid from his chair to one knee before her, still holding her hands in his. "Rose Jameson, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of joining our lives and our lands, of building something new together while honoring what came before?" "Yes," she said simply, her heart too full for elaborate declarations. "Yes, Quentin, I will." He rose, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. Their kiss was a promise, a commitment, a celebration of all they had endured and all that lay ahead. When they finally parted, breathless and laughing, Quentin pressed his forehead to hers. "I should warn you, Isabel has been planning our wedding since the day you arrived at the ranch. She'll be unbearable when she hears the news." Rose laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "She can plan whatever she likes as long as it happens soon." "I find I'm suddenly very eager to start our life together, Mr. Rawlins." "As am I, future Mrs. Rawlins," he murmured, pulling her close again. "As am I." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Skidoo, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had rallied around Rose during Donovan's trial, and who now celebrated the union of two of the territory's most promising ranching families. Isabel wept openly throughout the ceremony. Manuel stood proudly as Quentin's best man. Judge Parker himself performed the service, his usual judicial gravity giving way to genuine warmth as he pronounced them husband and wife. In the years that followed, the Rawlins Ranch, as the combined property came to be known, flourished under their joint stewardship. Rose's innovative ideas about breeding and land management complemented Quentin's practical experience and steady hand. Together, they weathered the natural challenges of ranching life: drought years and harsh winters, fluctuating cattle prices, and the ever-present competition from larger operations. Samuel Donovan was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life imprisonment in San Quentin. His empire crumbled, his ill-gotten properties returned to their rightful owners or sold to honest settlers. His name became a cautionary tale in Skidoo and throughout the territory, a reminder of the consequences of greed and corruption. For Rose and Quentin, the legacy of those dark days never entirely faded. Sometimes Rose still woke from nightmares of her father's death or her desperate flight through the mountains. On those nights, Quentin held her close, his strength and warmth a bulwark against the shadows of the past. But more often, they found themselves looking forward rather than back. The birth of their first child, a son they named Jack, after Rose's father, brought new joy and purpose to their lives. A daughter followed 2 years later, then another son, each child a testament to the love that had begun in the most unlikely circumstances. On the 5th anniversary of their marriage, Rose and Quentin rode together to the mountain cabin where they had first truly met. The small structure had weathered the years surprisingly well, though it remained as simple and rustic as Rose remembered. "Strange to think of it," she said as they dismounted, "that I was hiding here, terrified and alone, just 5 years ago. That I pointed a gun at you when you walked through that door." Quentin smiled, taking her hand as they approached the cabin. "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful and formidable woman I'd ever seen, even half frozen and scared to death." "And now look at us," Rose said, leaning into his side. 3 children, 2 thriving ranches joined as one, and a home filled with more love than I ever thought possible. Quentin wrapped his arm around her waist, drawing her closer. "Best decision I ever made, riding up to this cabin at dawn." "Best decision I ever made," Rose countered, "lowering that gun and trusting you when you said I was safe." They stood together in the clearing before the cabin, the afternoon sun warm on their faces, the future spreading out before them as vast and promising as the land they had come to share. And as Quentin bent to kiss his wife, Rose knew with absolute certainty that the words he had spoken on that fateful morning 5 years ago had been not just a promise but a prophecy, fulfilled beyond her wildest dreams. She was safe with him. Not because he protected her, though he would, fiercely, until his dying day, but because together they had built a love strong enough to withstand whatever life might bring. A love that had begun in fear and desperation, but had grown into something unshakable. A love that would endure, like the mountains around them, through all the seasons of their lives.